Hi everyone.
Hello, good morning. And we live
We're live here again with you.
Mhm.
Happy to be here and answer your questions and share our knowledge. So 10 o'clock, wonderful. So today we will be talking about the different diets or nutritional principles. We have received a multitude of questions that we have distilled to identify a few most popular diets in at least in the North America now. So this is what we will be discussing. There is such a multitude of diets in existence that it is often very difficult to navigate that field, that space, and understand the pitfalls or the benefits of um, those different diets. Which one should you choose for yourself, which one is right for you. So these are some of the questions that we will be answering today, and we do have a list of the diets that you asked us to talk about, starting with standard American diet, keto, paleo, vegetarian, macrobiotics, vegan, plant-based, raw vegan, and then some smaller divisions, so to speak, such as Mediterranean, Flexitarian, and the list goes on and on. And what most of you wanted to know is what are actually the ways to become more plant rich. So we will start discussing these things today, and if we are not done, we will continue next week. So human beings are complex biochemical machines, and what sets us apart from other animals, so to speak, is how resilient our bodies are. So every species, biological species, they have a species-specific diet. Human beings have been evolving or degrading in such a way that we have become accustomed to a very varied diet. So almost anything can be considered food for human beings nowadays. Of course, as a species, we also have a species-specific diet, but nowadays it just so happens that we eat all kinds of things, including insects, and even dirt can be considered diet, even clay can be considered diet. People eat rocks all the time in the form of salt, so on and so forth. So anything you would like to add back to nature before we start answering questions?
Uh, our body would optimally function with whatever it is provided. And this is the adaptability mechanism that's been evolving ever since we formed as a species. Now, what we have in common with the animal kingdom and other species, and what we can compare is um, how our digestive tract works and how it functions. Based on the enzymic content of our digestive tract, for example, we can compare the carnivore mouth cavity producing enzymes that lack the salivary amylase, which is ptyalin, which makes, and we do have that, that actually identifies that our um, primary line of nutrition is carbohydrate versus protein or fat. Another is that, on the contrary, which is kind of controversial, is that our acidity in the stomach ranges from 1.5 to 3.5, which actually tells that we are adapted to digest tough proteins too. But that is not an indicator to just take for granted and say that, oh, we are carnivores because we have that high acidity in our stomach. But it is the adaptability mechanism that's been also adjusted for a long time since we, as species, started eating meats instead of what our real line of nutrition is. And so it does in other species too. The acidity level adjusts within the stomach as the species go on different nutritional um, nutritional foods. I mean, nutrition on different foods. For example, if we started eating meat, then the acidity would rise. Whereas those species that remain um, plant-based and vegetarians, I mean herbivores, their acidity would not rise and would stay very low. So this is tricky, and many people would actually use this as the argument in the favor of the theory that we are omnivores or we are carnivores. However, the morphology of our body and our digestive tract is not as a carnivore. Um, Even if we compare ourselves with like larger apes that are close to us, that would have tools, natural tools, and we're talking about strength, physical strength, their ribs, their jaws, their fangs, much larger than ours, and still they're plant-based. Uh, they're herbivores. Gorillas, for example, they don't even eat any animal products, um, and they're very narrow in what they consume too as food. So beyond all these dietary principles or concepts that are now popping up like mushrooms after rain in August, that we don't even have time to follow all of them because we opened them and we looked around. There's so many uh, that you can really get lost, and there is no point in pursuing understanding each and every concept or diet unless, of course, somebody uh, in your surrounding presents that to you and you discuss this and they articulate it well and then you understand what it is. We need to go to the basics of what nutrition really is and understand the food groups, understand what how our digestion processes all these food groups. And beyond that, probably one of the most important aspects is to understand your own physiology, your own constitution, your own type of digestion, because there like would be three main types of digestion that human beings possess, and that also depends on the type of mentality. And because our mind is very prone to develop addictions and dependencies, habits, and then rolling on with their addiction, people become unhealthy, but think that the way that they eat is like very established traditional way that humans need to eat without giving consideration to other nutritional principles. Sometimes being even defensive and um, and looking for any justification for their dependency.
Because
That
the
way.
hardest thing to change is yourself, right?
Is the
Your own
mentality,
habits,
yes.
your own
And
mentality. Yes.
mentality, habits, for sure.
So people oftentimes would resort to all kinds of means to change other people around them, to
Yes.
change the world, as opposed to starting with
And that's why we
thyself.
are given this great mental aggregate, which is called intellect. This is not because of what we believe or because what other tells us. It is about being able to analyze and understand what is the reality, and then be open-minded and begin experimenting. So let's view this before we get to talking about the diets and nutritional principles, well-established nutritional principles. We're not talking about anything that is modern, that is just appeared, because that's any diet is any diet is based on the fundamental principles with the dynamics of specific foods being taken specific time, and and that's all the new diets are, and any diets are. But the basics are the same.
Food groups are still the same.
Of course, of course.
So, as a matter of fact, yesterday, as we were preparing for this podcast, we Googled the most popular diets right now, and we were amazed at how many have just sprung up recently. And what has been happening is that some strong brands, sometimes, for example, Weight Watchers, or there are some other ones, they would they would create a whole new dietary division, so to speak, and give it the name of the brand. So it becomes kind of like a widely accepted diet or nutritional principle. So this is very rampant as well right now.
And largely, it's a marketing move.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases, just to attract people and present them old concepts in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
All
Like
right.
for example, right now you could create your own diet and call it the raw diet or something.
we can articulate, not even one, but a few,
Okay.
maybe. But still, would like to stick to the basics and present nutrition from its fundamental standpoint. Okay, so let's get to the basics then.
Mhm.
And all of us know that there are three main food groups. They are carbohydrates and proteins and they're fats. Okay, and there are two more, and they're not really considered like large food groups. One would not even be considered food group to us because it's called alcohol, and they in some divisions they articulate that as a food group because gram of alcohol has seven calories, which is higher than carbohydrate and even protein.
Remember the beer belly that you guys talked about?
And that could be too,
Yeah.
yes, of course. And vegetables, but vegetables, vegetables are well, they can be considered as a separate food group. However, they contain all three inside, you know. And again, there's no such product in natural world unless it is isolated and refined or processed that can be truly sticking to a fat or carbohydrate or protein. In animal meats, we find all three of them, and yet we consider it protein, and so on, and that applies to basically everything.
So there is nothing that's strictly just proteins.
Yes.
That's strictly just
Everything
fats.
is balanced. Nature made it so. It is by our mental game that we consider that refining products and isolating a food group is something smart and can actually get us somewhere to what we think is healthy us, but well, sometimes certain imbalances can be cured with imbalanced products, and that's true too.
If the
Because
imbalance
one
is there
extremity, one extreme takes another one to balance. Sometimes when people are overpolluted, they need the extreme pure product in order to pull that pollution out, and this is the balance too. In case like overpolluted body requires refined fruit juice that is, that can be balanced, viewed as balanced. So the energy, this is what we eat for. Energy is the main component of nutrition. We all need energy in order to carry out our vitality and functions. We can discuss the energy components later, but right now let's just talk about energy in its conventional meaning, which is the heating energy, which is measured in calories, and that is provided by food and the way that we understand energy. But we'll elaborate on what the energy really is, some later, and once we covering, like raw veganism, then we will differentiate some other parts of energy. Um, so the first line of nutrition, like I said, is carbohydrate. This is the easiest one. It's digested fairly quickly. This is what we are drawn to eat because by nature, even if you sit a child who is not yet capable of thinking, um, and give him the choice between like an apple and piece of meat, the child would very likely choose the apple.
Naturally,
Yes.
instinctively.
Intuitively.
Mhm.
So, and another morphological features and whatever we mentioned before actually say that we are carbohydrate creatures. I mean, the carbohydrate-based and nutritional requirements creatures.
Yes. So I would like to share a great story. So I was at an event at a middle school. It was probably a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago. And you know how in schools they have different projects. So this particular project was about kids writing down their favorite foods, and then the teachers put those stickies on the wall so you could see, what all of the kids actually prefer to eat. And so I actually took the time to read every single one of them to see what the dynamic is right now. And I was so pleased to see that the majority of the kids actually picked fruit. And we're talking about middle-aged school kids. How about that? So the second food group was pasta, but fruit was number one, either bananas or grapes or watermelon and other fruits. So that was that was wonderful to see.
Yes, and we know that kids love sweet. They love sweet, and sweet is carbohydrate. Fats are not sweet. Proteins are not sweet, even though they're considered to be umami taste, considered to be partially sweet, but it's not sweet to taste. But carbohydrates are, and carbohydrates are the first line of energy for us, and they provide us with quick and sustainable, in most cases, sustainable energy, other than those refined starchy things that we already make and process on our own by our own mind, but not natural. However, energy is provided by carbohydrate, and the digestion of carbohydrate goes fairly quick. Carbohydrate doesn't stay long in the stomach. It moves into the small intestine fairly quickly. This is where the digestion of carbohydrate for complex carbohydrate happens. And carbohydrates are alkaline based, and the digestion is alkaline based for carbohydrates. If carbohydrates, when they provide us with the energy, are not utilized quickly, because it needs to also be utilized as quickly as it has been provided, then our body turns that into fat. And this is where many people don't understand, cannot make, cannot figure out how come that they're, but it's been lately on the rise where people understand that it is particular to carbohydrates that we accumulate fat, and fat is the storage of the energy, as we know, unutilized energy. That means that we are consuming too much of carbohydrates, and that is not turned into energy and being stored as a fat. And the fat is a sump pump for, I mean, the sump. It is the storage for toxic and pollution, toxic substances, heavy metals. This is uh, where most of the toxins sit within our body. And whatever we eat, no matter what we eat, the carbohydrate will be utilized first for energy. If we if we stop eating carbohydrate and only eat proteins or fats, the body will continue utilizing carbohydrate, whatever's the remainder of carbohydrate inside the body, no matter whether it's circulating in the blood or it is stored in the liver or within the muscle. It would not resort to utilizing the fat energy or the protein energy or turning them into energy by very complex mechanisms. It would continue utilizing the carbohydrate. And then once it depletes of carbohydrate, only then it will begin breaking down fats. This is the reverse mechanism where the fat needs now be turned back into energy, and certain enzymes are produced now to break down the fats stored within the body in order to gain the energy back. And that is a very complex process because turning energy into the fat is easy for the body and is quick too. However, the reverse process is not that easy. So fats is a next food group, and it has more significant amount of calories per gram. However, fats would be always the energy supplier number two after carbohydrates. And as like I said, until we deplete of carbohydrate, the fats will not be broken down. And for us to get down to breaking fats, we should exclude carbohydrate. It does not mean that we need to eat fats or eat proteins. We just need to exclude the carbohydrate. And we may exclude fat too, and exclude proteins, and just go on fasting. And that way we can deplete of carbohydrate resource in our body and then begin breaking down fats even more efficiently and quicker than the other way around when we're still consuming fats and proteins and just excluding carbohydrate. And these diets are like low carbohydrate diets, low carb diets, such as Paleo, such as Keto. Keto excludes carbohydrates completely. And other low carb diets are based on excluding carbohydrate in order to start to begin breaking down fats. And if we were to look at this from the perspective of energies and Ayurveda, it all makes sense because carbohydrates, they are nutrition of the lightest nutrition. The lightest energy is the energy of space and air. And this is why carbohydrates are considered to be of that type of energy. And once we exclude that energy, then we go to on a level of the fire, and oils are fire and fats are fire too. But some fats, more saturated fats, the transitional form of the energy from energy of fire, energy of transformation, to energy of stabilization, energy of earth. It all resonates and has its parallel and can be compared. But since many people would not understand the principles of Ayurveda, I'm not really revealing it fully, but we're just talking in the level of Western science. So the fats would begin breaking down once we exclude carbohydrates. And this is what keto diet and low carb diets are based on. We begin breaking down fats. And this is why another thing is that we need to, at some point, exclude the unsaturated fats and introduce saturated fats, because some fats are saturated within our body. And until we exclude the unsaturated fats, saturated fats will not break down. So this is another trick with the keto diet. And there are more tricks with keto diet that conceptualize the keto diet, that actually shows that keto diet is not really very independent type of diet. It also depends on some other things, and it's not only fats that comprise the keto diet. However, when the keto diet has the trick is that, and many people do not consider that, is that when we consume large amount of fats, we consume them with proteins. Even though we're excluding carbohydrate, but we are eating proteins at the same time. And even though fats and proteins are compatible and they can be eaten together, they do not contradict each other. The digestion does not really suffer much in terms of biochemistry, but in the end, proteins, depending on the type of proteins, we really laying the foundation stone for the problems to arise later in the long run with the consumption of proteins. Because think of it, it is the keto diet, and nobody tells it's a proto diet. We're not in a proto diet. Why then would we want to exclude proteins and stay on fats only? And that would be a healthier way to, but nobody can just eat fats, without having the substantial everybody. So this turns into the play of the mind again. This is again the mind game, where people are holding to what they really want and like, to their habits. Oh, it is okay. I'm ready to give up the carbs. It's okay. I'd rather give up fruit. I'd rather give up grains, but I would hold on to my piece of meat. This is the logic behind it. How does this happen that people, when their children choosing fruit and then they so easily change their mind and go begin choosing proteins instead of fruit? There are two factors. One of them is that the energies of the older age are so that we are going into the different stage, and the energies that prevail are not the earthly energy anymore. They're fiery energy, and digestion becomes strong, and then little by little the digestive juices become concentrated with acid. And then the acid requires, especially like we mentioned, the adaptability mechanism that brings our acidity high to the 1.5 to 3.5 level, which is very comparable to the carnivore acidity in the stomach. Then, of course, we become dependent on that. Another reason is the bacteria that overgrows in our intestine, small intestine, is the one that begins to prevail, is the one that requires from you to eat this type of food. So it's not really our independent choice, it's the choice of our bacteria in our microbiome, which affects our mentality and drives you to think that this is what you crave for, this is what you want, but in fact, it's the bacteria that is starving and sends you impulses on a subconscious level to feed it, and you are choosing that type of nutrition. Yes.
Additionally, we become very conditioned by the society, and unfortunately nowadays a lot of cultures around the world, at least here in America, they're centered around unhealthy foods. So even, for example, this Smithsonian edition of this wonderful Picturepedia, they proudly mentioned that the U.S. is number one, the population of the U.S. is number one consumer of meat in the entire world. So it is certainly so, but look where it got us, right? So we have gotten accustomed to these kinds of foods, but the rate of the disease is unprecedented, and the number of diseases are also rampant and on the rise. And the diseases are becoming younger and younger. So now it's not only older people who are getting sick, kids. One in every two kids now has a chronic disease. So, and please put it down in the comments if you believe that this kind of food is one of the main factors why our population is so sick.
Yes, it's all true. This is unfortunately the reality of the day, and we have to deal with it. But on our personal, individual level, we really are responsible for what we choose, even though we are affected by society and by our surrounding, immediate surrounding, family, friends, who judge and who just dictate in many ways what we should do and what type of life we should lead and things like that. We still need to make our mindful, conscious decisions about what we choose and how we want to, uh, treat ourselves. So the next food group is protein, and protein is the latest reserve for our body to turn into the energy, to break it down for energy needs. And this is a very complex mechanism, very demanding, very energy wasting mechanism to break down proteins. Number one is because some proteins, our digestive tract by nature has been designed to break down very simple, non-complex proteins, such as polypeptide chains of nuts and seeds. Maybe that would be the toughest ones. But the denser proteins humans chose, the higher the acidity in the stomach grew, and that is required. The uh, for the protein breakdown. So proteins are broken down within the stomach and by the acid environment. That's what the carnivores have. The most acidic digestive juice is in crocodiles. Crocodiles, they're very acidic creatures. And this is where the acidity derives from. If we eat too much of proteins, then the acidity rises, and the environment for bacteria growth and for diseases actually is favorable within our body. The balancing mechanism, which is the alkalizing mechanism, is not really present during the acidity in order to neutralize it, because our body is made so that it cannot allow the acidity to reign within the bloodstream. It needs to neutralize it, and therefore it begins to breaking down its own tissues in order to neutralize this acidity, especially bones and muscle, in order to neutralize the acidity. So some of the denser proteins, our body still is not adjusted to break down to the monomeric particles, which are amino acids. And amino acids is the basic particle that is required for our needs, because our body actually builds its own proteins, and all it needs in that respect is the basic building block, which is the amino acid. It's not the complex protein. It's not the proteins that we need, especially when we talk about dense complex proteins that cannot be digested really down to the basic amino acids. Considering when we combine these proteins, and that what happens most of the time with other food groups, especially with carbohydrates. Lucky are those who, well, conditionally lucky, those who do the separate nutrition, who do not mix carbohydrates with proteins when they digest. But most population doesn't do it because they just don't know. But once the proteins are combined with carbohydrates like meat and potatoes, or some pasta and chicken, things like that. And even that applies to the plant-based kingdom too, which is, for example, pasta and beans, pasta and nuts, or fruit and nuts. These combinations also block the digestion, the breakdown of the proteins, and they definitely affect the digestion of carbohydrates as well, especially if it is fruit, not so much of the complex carbohydrates. But what happens is that carbohydrates within the stomach are processed not by hydrochloric acid, but hydrofluoric acid, and that is a mild acid, very gentle, and that actually preserves the small intestine from damage, because, as you know, the food proceeds into the small intestine, and hydrochloric acid is required for digestion of proteins, and that is a rougher, more potent acid that needs to break down proteins, and this is why the proteins would stay within the stomach for up to 3 to 4 hours, being processed with the acid and enzyme pepsin in order to break it down as much as possible. But if the carbohydrate is mixed with it, then that process is not really complete, and the carbohydrate, once it proceeds from the stomach into the intestine, pulls the proteins which are undigested yet into the next compartment of digestive system, which is the small intestine. And within the small intestine, the environment changes from acidic into alkaline environment. It is pretty high alkaline environment because pancreas juices and bile are very alkaline. And even though we have the enzyme trypsin that works um, on the proteins too, that enzyme is not really as strong as pepsin, and only is designed there to take care of already mostly broken proteins. So what happens then is that the undigested proteins that proceed from the stomach into the small intestine, they remain in the small intestine undigested and begin to decompose, basically, to decay. Some part of it that has been broken, uh, and some of it that has not been broken fully, still manage to get into the bloodstream. Part of them goes into the liver. In the liver, they need to be neutralized, and that damages the liver too. Because those undigested proteins, they are not building blocks. They are antigens. Uh, the body doesn't view them as nutrients anymore, and immediately produces the antibodies in order to neutralize, in order to um, eliminate, remove this antigen. And within the body, within the tissues, uh, after those reactions, antigen antibody, which is the autoimmune reaction or immune reaction, but then this long-standing immune reaction will turn into autoimmune reaction because this process is ongoing, and then uh, in the within the process of cell regeneration, the mutation happens, and the process becomes autoimmune too, and the body begins attacking itself. Um, but within the tissues, we may observe the accumulation of this toxic matter, which is basically a plastic substance, decaying substance, decaying matter that hides, that the body is actually hides within the tissue, so it's not freely circulating within the blood, and that pollution grows and brings about lots of health conditions, and autoimmune one of them. And cancer is ultimate, because then what happens is within this decaying tissue, and when we talk about, if we talk about that stage, then the condition at that stage, the condition of the GI tract is really in poor state, because we at that stage we can talk about leaky gut, we can talk about the overgrowth of bacteria, we can talk about irritable bowel syndrome, and all imaginable conditions of GI tract, including the fungal infection, bacterial infection that can now overgrow and overflow from the GI tract into the tissues and hide and develop within those pockets of decay within the tissue and produce mutation and develop as oncological conditions. That's what the consumption of protein ultimately is fraught with if we look in the long run. So all the yes.
By the way, on our YouTube channel, you're welcome to watch additional videos that we created for you on inflammation and on the pitfalls and benefits of keto diet.
Yes, that's right. So any dietary concepts that are based on consumption of proteins are only good initially when we are not taking in carbohydrates, and that is in order to begin to deplete of the glycogen, which is also the starchy substance, which is the carbohydrate, so that we can get down breaking the fats, and then the fats would also the fats is line two of the energy reserve, and the body will begin breaking down fats. Even if we're staying on protein, the body will get down to fats and will begin breaking down fats, releasing a lot of toxins too, which is also a cleansing concept, and that can actually last for years. Somebody can stay on paleo or on carnivore diet for years before they know that they have gathered a lot of problems with the protein digestion, which affects kidneys, which affects liver, which affects digestion and mentality too, and forms this very dangerous conditions, predisposes to development of cancer and high acid environment, multitude of infectious conditions as well. So within the body, but as a cleansing mechanism, initially it is beneficial to get rid of the glycogen, because the glycogen, even though it's a starchy substance, it still would contain some toxic substances that are circulating within the blood. It's like these substances are mixed into the glycogen, and then the glycogen is turning into fat, pulling those toxins with it and retaining them already as a fat tissue. This is the pathway for the toxins within the body. And then when we are breaking down either glycogen, we are releasing those toxins that are mixed with it. And when we're breaking down fats, we are releasing the toxins that are mixed within the fat tissue too. And sometimes when we're breaking down fats and utilizing the ketones for energy, but the toxins are being released and they're circulating within the blood, we need to also understand that breaking down fats, especially if we have a lot of resources of that, is also dangerous in terms that the toxins are being released, and they need to also be considered in terms of how you want to eliminate them, how you want to navigate them out of the body. And in many people whose system, and somebody who's overweight and has a lot of fat tissue with a lot of toxins stored in it, is very much at risk of the kidney and liver dysfunction. And if those organs, the filters of the body, are polluted and clogged, then the quick release of toxins will actually can even damage the these filters, these organs fairly quickly, because then the workload increases on these organs. And if they already affected, then the consequences can be fatal even. So prior to breaking down fats, we need to understand and take care of these pathways of the filters of our body, kidneys and liver specifically. So we need to purify and cleanse them and get rid of the calcifications and mucus within these organs, make the pathways nice and patent in order to handle the large amount of toxins that will be released from the fat tissue. And once the uh, individual goes through this successful cleanse, but consumes the proteins, uh, then in the long run, some other health issues would arise. And we see that in many people who are in long-term ketosis, the development of uh, um, cancer of kidneys, of the urinary system, and like just generally um, a lot of conditions that they then suffer too, inflammation and things like that. So okay, let's get back to now to the. So these are fundamentals of nutrition. Now we've kind of touched upon ketogenic diet and what is based on, and paleo diet. Now let's talk about vegetarianism. Vegetarianism originally, and this is what I would consider was the concept where no animal products was consumed, but lately, and that happened maybe within the past few centuries, the vegetarianism is considered to be lactic plant-based
The
nutrition.
concept has been changed, modified.
Yes, right. And that
So nowadays, vegetarianism is considered to be is considered to include dairy products
yes,
and
and plant-based
and
plant-based nutrition, yes, and dairy products. It excludes eggs, it excludes fish and seafood, so nothing else but dairy products only. Now let's talk about dairy products and some of the plant-based foods that may not be really beneficial and considered healthy, but would still be a choice as the individual is integrating this concept, would still be a healthier choice than being on the standard American diet. And standard American diet, I think that we haven't mentioned, but I think everybody understands what it is.
Mhm. So it's basically standard American diet is what the majority of population eats nowadays. It's high in fat, high in protein, high in sugar and salt, high in processed food. So it's basically burgers and hot dogs and fries and sugary sweets and a lot of refined pasta and a lot of other refined products and a lot of
Yes.
canned and over processed foods.
Without really giving consideration to health, but just going on the desires and habits and dependencies.
And of course, it is very acidic in nature just because of the foods consumed. And I would like to share a personal story. So, a lot of you are aware of my personal health story, how it all started, that I had a very bad postpartum depression after our firstborn. And I developed a fear of cancer because a friend of mine died from cancer at that time. So that was a trigger for me. So I'm really grateful to that experience because it opened up my eyes to different ways to heal naturally. But at that time, my health was disintegrating rapidly. And I remember reading an article that there was a scientific research done that showed that cancer develops in an acidic environment. So anything below 5.5 would be considered to be very acidic. And I purchased those pH testing strips, and I was using them daily to monitor my acidity level. And of course, my body was very acidic. And when I switched to macrobiotics, which we will talk about later, and eliminated virtually all of the animal products and processed foods, my pH level started to rise. So I just wanted to throw this out there.
All right, very good. So, dairy products, what are they, and what can be considered for um, healthier than others? Out of this spectrum of wide range of dairy products, we should consider excluding anything that has the protein, the dairy protein in it, and that would be the casein. Casein is the dairy product that is very dangerous to our health. Um, Casein is considered to be a complete protein, and it is, but it is very high molecular, very complex protein that does not break down fully again, and may and the structure of this protein highly resembles the structure of the protein of um, our beta cells in the pancreas. And consumption of dairy products, particularly cheese or just milk with casein content in it, would cause the autoimmune reaction to casein, to beta cells in our pancreas, causing the diabetes number one, juvenile diabetes. This is the reason for development of the juvenile diabetes type 1, and this is the causative factor. So excluding the casein out of dairy, excluding the some of the uh, lactic lactic sugars, that would be very the initial and necessary steps to do. Just putting it in simple words, the only fat-based dairy products from the standpoint of biochemistry are acceptable for human body. Butter, ghee, that's okay from the standpoint of biochemistry, but from the standpoint of uh, whole food nutrition, it is not really. And from the ethical standpoint, for the animal right, it is also not very acceptable. And again, it is a refined product. It's not something that we cannot replace because we can find all types of fats within the plant kingdom. And another thing is that those fats that we think that we cannot find in our physiology are just being substituted, and our body has uh, lost the ability of making them, such as omega fatty acids. Our body is capable of producing them, but it has lost the ability of doing so. And this is why they're substituted, but little by little, that function can be reestablished, um, and no animal products would be necessary. Again, when we talk about animal products, we need to understand that animals, they also feed on plants. So the plant kingdom is the producent.
The first line of nutrition.
Yes, it has everything that the nature produces within it, and we just need to find it and eat smart. Understand where the real source of specific vitamins and specific and minerals and fatty acids, and then we need to switch to plant-based sources, and that way we can uh, regain them, we can saturate with them. Maybe initially that requires to be supplemented in supplements, which would be more concentrated sources where we can saturate quicker. Whereas, like eating, foods that in a regular way and still be deficient and fill up this deficiency in a long term. So supplements would actually be beneficial in that way and indicated too. But some good, nice natural supplements is a good way to solve these deficiencies. However, they all need to be plant-based, and we can find everything, like I said, in the plant-based kingdom, in the plant kingdom.
By the way, cheese is one of the hardest things to let go of because it works as a drug on the human body, and there are a lot of studies that reveal that the chemical casein, it works on opioid receptors. So basically, there are a lot of health movements that classify the cheese produced by modern standards as a drug, basically, heroin-based drug.
So that's what how the dairy products, just excluding dairy products, would be beneficial in any way. However, if you consider keeping some of it, then go with fat-based animal dairy products initially, and then look for the sources of fats in in the within the plant-based products. In the next group of vegetarian diet is definitely grains. As we know, vegetarians, since they do not eat much of proteins, they eat a lot of grains, which are carbohydrates, and they eat a lot of beans, legumes too. So worth mentioning about legumes and dairy and grains are the fact that they are cooked and processed. In most of the time, it's not in standard that they're sprouted and made the plants out of, and then consumed that way. When they're sprouted, when they yield the lectins, when they're vibrant and boosted with the amount of vitamins. When the sprouting happens, then as we know, the vitamins, they multiply, and the amount of proteins also um, also grows. So once the grain and legumes are processed, they turn into an unhealthy substance, which would actually turn into the mucus within digestive tract, and that again is based on the lectin content. And what these products are, they're basically polymeric carbohydrates, and this glycoprotein, which is the lectin, which is within the grain, would again be very allergenic and would turn into the mucus in the bloodstream and would cause again the trigger reactions. As we know, lectins, they trigger allergenic reactions, and one of them is gluten, and we know gluten is pretty dangerous substance for those, especially with gluten intolerance. They can develop very bad reaction to gluten. So accumulating these substances within the body is also would also lead to development of the inflammation and overweight, the fat tissue formation, So this what happens, and in the long run, we may see the metabolic syndrome kick in, such as diabetes, and then diabetes. First, it will be the insulin resistant diabetes, but then it will be insulin dependent diabetes as well, because the pancreas it suffers and loses the ability to secrete the insulin, and then the liver would suffer too, because this polymeric substance, which acts as a glue-like substance within the body, would stuff up the liver and cause the damage. And the obesity and the blood clot formation that follows that, in the um, development of the symptoms along that line. That's what this is what vegetarian diet is actually dangerous with. However, it is the if it's balanced and if it's eaten in moderation and eaten with the appropriate vegetables and appropriate spices, then it can be a long-standing type of nutrition and lifestyle for some individuals, and can be a lot healthier than the standard American diet, for example, or the Paleo diet, or even the Keto diet. That can, especially if some nutritional habits are integrated, such as the long. I think we need to connect this that way. And sorry, I think we're running out of battery. We need to connect it. Just give us a quick minute, please. So, yes. Oh, I'm sorry again. And even those diets that have some dangers, long-term dangers lurking under the waters, and in the long term would actually bring us to real bad uh, consequences, because it is easier to deal with the uh, fatty tissue deposits with certain special toxins within the system that are forming out of vegetarian diet, for example, than those that are forming out of the protein-based diet. Because the protein-based diet toxins are really difficult to neutralize, to extract, to deal with, and they damage at a deeper level. They damage the deeper structures, and that is just basically irreversible damage. However, the damage that is caused by vegetarian diet, for example, is easier to fix later when the consequence come about. However, if, like I said, if it's considered and not taken overly, if it's chewed well, and certain rules like separate nutrition and combinations applied to vegetarian diet, it can be healthy and long-standing diet that can actually give the person to live long and happy life too. So
At the end of the day, of course, it's about whole foods versus processed foods, right? Any one of these diets has a chance of keeping a person fairly healthy, providing the person with a fairly long lifespan, which is nowadays 90 years old is considered to be a very old person. So
yes, yes,
which is nothing to what it was even just a few centuries ago.
yeah, yes,
So even in the 17th century, 18th century, there are records of many people living to be 300 years old, but we're not going to talk about it. So it's basically about eating whole foods and not eating processed junk food. So no matter what diet you're on, if you do that, that will already provide you with immense benefits. So just wanted to cover one last question because I think it's very important. What do you think of eating for the blood type?
Eating for the blood type. In fact, what I think of eating for the blood type is kind of wrong, because the blood type, there are actually more blood types than just those that we know. And it is not the blood type that defines our nutrition, but our nutrition defines the blood type. The blood type is dynamic property, and it shifts and changes. And this is the blood type theory is just a misconception. This is what I think, and what we really need to eat for is for energy and sustainability of the energy.
Eating for life and eating for health.
Right. And once we get to discussing what the energy is and what components and how our body processes the energy, then we will understand why it is important to eat for energy, and the energy, not just the physical where you can move, but also the mental energy and the spiritual energy too. So again, this person who excessively eats animal products, being blood type 0, is predisposed to developing of oncological and cancers too. There is no exclusion. If you were to look into the statistics, I'm not really sure whether it's public or not, but they are no different than other blood types that are not recommended to eat animal products, but eat like plant-based products, that they would not develop the same rate of cancers, same type of cancers, and would not suffer same conditions that those that have different blood type. So yes, and like I said, the blood type is dynamic. In fact, there are more than 30 or even 40 blood types, and the blood type is based on what your nutritional habits are, not the other way around.
Chemical composition.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for joining us today. Next week, we will continue covering your questions. We will get to macrobiotics, vegan, plant-based way of eating, raw vegan, and some other ones. So
yeah, next.
Thank you.
Next week we'll continue. Thank you for being with us. Look forward to
Yes, and thank you for all your questions.
Yes, thank you.
And please share our videos. Please comment on our videos. Help us grow our channel. It goes a lot into making all this content for you guys. But we really love doing that. So please support us by liking the video, sharing the video, and posting comments.
Yes, thank you.